We're going to move on to our final session of day 3. We're going to be looking at Christian living in 2022. No small topic that we're going to be addressing, and I'm really excited to have a few people join me this evening and to discuss this topic. And I'm going to introduce Alianore Smith, who is Church Partnership and Theology Manager at International Justice Mission, having previously worked in culture and young adult engagement for the London Institute of Contemporary Christianity. Hello, Alianore, how are you doing?
Hey, I just got upgraded to being a panelist, which is my first ever experience. It's very exciting. I feel very honoured to be a panelist on a Zoom call.
Oh, look at that. No, it's so good to have you as a panelist, Alianore. Really, really excited. And I'm going to introduce, we've got a couple more people as well joining us. We have Dr. Lisa Ajay, and Lisa is a church leader has been a church leader for a number of years. And is the founder of an initiative called Sankofa Collective UK, an ecumenical racial justice and reconciliation community for Christians. Welcome, Dr. Lisa. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much, Matt. Real honor to be here and to be joining you guys in the conversation.
Oh, fabulous. Good evening. And I'd love to welcome up as well onto the stage Janet Oyedele. Janet is the founder of Ascribe, a Christian lifestyle platform for entrepreneurial women. She's also a business coach and finance consultant, supporting entrepreneurs and businesses to reach their strategic objectives. This is the second time that Janet has been involved in a session this week. So good to see you, Janet.
Hi, thanks for having me, Matt. So lovely to be here with you all.
Well, firstly, thank you for giving up some of your Friday evening to be here and to discuss this rather big topic, Christian living in 2022. I mean, we could go all sorts of ways with this, and but really the heart behind it is, we've come through a massive challenging couple of years. We've all faced challenges in different ways. The landscape has changed in our own context where we're living out our faith Sunday to Saturday. And, maybe in some way we can chat together and see how we might be able to continue to pursue Jesus in 2022 and beyond, and things that we might have in place, and hear from you guys on how you're going to be sticking close to Jesus and how you're going to be leaning into the things that God's calling you into. Does that sound good? Does that sound good for a kind of conversation? Brilliant stuff. And those that are watching, feel free to post in the chat on the right hand side of your screen. Feel free to post any questions or comments as we have a conversation. So, Christian living in 2022, what do we mean by that? Christian living, obviously it's discipleship, it's mission, it's spiritual formation, all of that stuff. What are you thinking about in terms of Christian living? How can we grow as disciples in 2022? Big picture first, and we'll drill down into some things. Lisa, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. This is a great one to kick off with, and I think for me that word discipleship really comes to the forefront when we're talking about Christian living. I really do feel like, especially for our generation, that we're getting back to that theme of discipleship, kind of moving away from kind of mass church and kind of just Sunday mornings to kind of that authenticity, the community, the doing day-to-day life, and what does it look like for us to follow Jesus, to be Christ-like in those moments. And I know that there's a real uprising in the theme of justice and, our generation waking up to justice. And I think it's causing people to ask that question. What does it mean to follow Jesus? What does it look like to follow Jesus? And should justice be a part of that? And so I think this theme of discipleship is a real theme that's going to continue. And I hope it continues in 2022, that we keep asking those questions and looking at the way that we're living, we're speaking, the actions that we're taking, racial justice, climate justice, all of those things drill back down to discipleship. What does it look like for us to be followers of Jesus? And so I really want to kind of see that come through this year.
It's fabulous. I don't know, what would you add to that or comment on that?
Completely agree. When you think about discipleship, it can be so easy to just think about, like, what are we doing with churches, and what are we doing in small groups, and what are we doing with this? But actually, when I think of discipleship, I want to be able to think of everyday life, because fundamentally our everyday life, our workplace, our sports teams, our orchestras, whatever it is, that's where we're being formed into Christ-likeness, because we're coming up against all those situations. They always joke, I prayed to God for more patience, then he gave me a situation where I really want to lose my temper the whole time. Like, it's in those moments that we're being formed into Christ-likeness. It's those moments that we're finding our discipleship and following Jesus where the rubber hits the road. And so to think about Christian living is to think not just about churches, not just about evangelism, as important as evangelism is, but also like, what does it look like to model godly character as a Christian in the workplace? What does it look like to speak up for truth and justice, Lisa? Like you said, what does it look like to mold a culture of a parent and toddler group? All those little things which we're probably already doing, and perhaps we haven't realized, or that we just need to be encouraged in. Actually, this is discipleship as well. It's not just soapbox or evangelism or church. It's everyday life being a follower of Jesus.
Janet, anything to comment on that?
Yeah, I agree with both the ladies on that. I think in terms of discipleship, I think the first thing that sticks out to me, need to sit at the feet of Jesus. I think even before we go out and start doing anything, we need to really understand and have that deep connection with Christ. And it always reminds me of the story of Mary and Martha, because especially in our like hurry culture where there's so much going on and this activity and I've got to do this, it's like, have we spent time with Jesus first before we go out and try and preach about him? So I think when I think about being a disciple, is first of all understanding my need to go to the source, understand, learn from Christ, and then go out and share him. So yeah, in as much as we're doing all of these other things, I think it's just really taking the time out, prioritizing our time with Jesus, making sure that we're not pouring from an empty cup, and then going out on missions like Paul. Paul even said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. So we always need to take it back to Christ, sit at Christ's feet first, and then go out.
Just thinking back the last couple of years, the challenges that we've faced, maybe thinking about discipleship, but also the opportunities, the breakthroughs. We've been talking about discipleship. I guess we've been saying has been something that has been a bit of a focus. It's obviously not a new focus. This is we've been invited to this, the church, the last 2,000 years and beyond, the people of God, to follow God and trust him and place our trust in him. And just thinking about the last couple of years though, where would you say we've seen some of the challenges when it's come to discipleship? And then in a moment we can flip over to where have been some of the breakthroughs that we've seen.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I think some of the challenges have been in the way that I think our society in general has progressed. And so I think that we've had more of an emphasis on kind of individual living, the kind of that hustle culture of, go get it, go get yours, kind of build your own. And I think sometimes that has sort of crept into the church a little bit. And so we've kind of lost our focus, or maybe our love sometimes, for community, for gathering together, for I guess valuing that time together, and so some small groups have flourished, but I know that some have not, and people have kind of sort of come to church but not really built deep relationships. And I think that even in the last 2 years with COVID, we've seen that emergence of actually it's really important who knows you, who knows your name, who are you a part of, who are you in community with, who are you in deep relationship with. And it was lovely over COVID to see people looking out for their neighbors again, people looking out for one another and checking in on one another again. And so I think when it comes to discipleship, sometimes some of the pressures of the world and the way that we do life has kind of crept in to how we do discipleship and kind of maybe stifled some of that a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind. I don't know if anyone wants to jump into that, and then might come back.
I'll probably add to that as well and say, I think because we're in the information era where there's so much information that we're consuming on a day-by-day basis, whether that's through social media or just friends and family. It can be quite difficult to kind of filter through the noise and ensure that we're actually receiving what we need to edify ourselves as disciples of Jesus and not get sidetracked as Christians. And so I think one of the challenges, our own standing in the world in this time, in this moment. I mean, sometimes at work, you hear people's anxieties through the way they speak and the way they respond to things. And it's being able to take that stance of hope, you know, and say that actually, no, this isn't the way it's always going to be, or there is another path, or there's another solution towards some of the problems we're facing. So I think it's just being able to filter out any negative news or negative information and really be bold in the way we respond to things that are happening around us so that we can demonstrate our faith and our hope in Christ. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think there's something I've just been kind of mulling it over. There's something, that kind of difference between the world has gotten bigger but also smaller. And so we have this whole like idea of everything that's happening in the world, everything feels a bit terrible and all of this kind of stuff. We have all this bad news, but then also, particularly during the first few lockdowns, it was the world suddenly got really small, and it was just like our household, maybe our neighbors, if we had like a neighborhood WhatsApp group, but this kind of understanding of like, so I worked from home, and in the first lockdown, my housemates were medics. And so like I had some level of understanding of kind of the world outside of my home office. But so many of my colleagues and friends, their world had gotten so small, and it was just like, well, I get up, I go to my desk, I do my stuff on my desk, and then I go home, or I go to my bed again. Like, and suddenly the world got smaller. And so we had this big, bad world and this small kind of like just kind of ongoing, little bit dull, repetitive world, and a lack of kind of understanding of other people's experiences, because my desk is completely different from someone whose job is as a bus driver or a medic or a carer or a child or someone who's having to plan funerals, or, you know, any of those different things. And so I think an understanding of, I think empathy is one thing that has been quite a challenge in some ways, because we're in such an alien culture that to imagine that someone else's alien culture is just almost impossible, right?
Would you say that what has been our relationship with the local church, with our churches during the last couple of years? Has the tie and commitment to our church slightly weakened, or and if so, how, or maybe not? What would you say?
I think, I'm not going to lie to you, Matt, I really struggled at the beginning of lockdown watching online church. I was like, what is the difference between watching online church and watching Gilmore Girls on Netflix? Like, fundamentally, like, how am I engaging well with this? And so actually for me, my lifeline was my small group, which was a different day, and it wasn't like and obviously it depended on church, whether it was a live stream or whether it was a pre-recorded thing, and all of these different kind of things. But actually I think the kind of integrity and the commitment has been a lot more kind of you had to self-motivate with the church, which I personally found that very difficult at times. I was like, you know what, if I'm going to stream something, sometimes I just want to stream Gilmore Girls, you know? I'm just going to be honest.
No, that's great. And I think you've just named something that's really, really important, this which I think will come through in the conversation. But Janet, Lisa, anything else to add or comment on that?
I was actually going to say something similar, because it reminds me of university, where you have to really motivate yourself to go to the lecture. But yeah, I found it quite challenging at the start as well, because I felt like it was a bit harder to engage in the service when I was watching it online. There was a lot more distractions at home and things like that. And fortunately, I was able to go into church during lockdown to help out, because we were live streaming and I'm part of the media team. And it just felt a lot different being in the building and having that presence of God with like a few other people to watching it online. And the only thing that I can liken it to is like a stage of maturity, where in some respects, you're not going to be in a large gathering sometimes it's not going to be a lot of people that are going to be around you to fuel your faith. And if you're watching it online, you have to be able to get yourself to that place where you can silence the noise and you can concentrate and focus. And you do that through the Holy Spirit, because we have to remember that the church is the people. And so I think it's kind of pushed me to that space of maturity in terms of, okay, how do I connect with God with or without others around me? So, yeah.
Thanks, Janet. Yeah, Lisa, anything else to?
Yeah, and
share?
I would just jump in off the back of that and just say that I think it exposed a lot. It exposed where we had gaps, maybe in our discipleship, maybe in our discipline, maybe in our when you've got the opportunity to watch church from bed and not have to leave your PJs, and not have to get on the bus, not have to see anyone on the way, not have to greet anybody, or speak to anyone at the end of the service, or try and find a way out. Like, all of those things were taken away, and it was almost stripped back to, like, will you still worship God? Will you still engage? Will you still make time? And all of those questions. And not, I don't mean that in a sort of guilt or condemnation sort of way, but just it showed so much of, how are we really doing? Where are we really at? And so I think it was good for us. And hopefully over time, a lot of us pushed through that and pushed through the tiredness, the disengaged maybe side of it. And like Janet, I had the opportunity of going back to a socially distanced service, and I needed it. I think it gave me a fresh understanding of the value of corporate worship, because I'd grown up in church my whole life, and so you go to church and it's what you've always known. But when you haven't been in a room singing with other people, having the opportunity to worship with other people, even if you can't sing past the mask or give anyone a hug, it was just being present with others. And it just showed me the value of corporate worship just in a whole new way for me. So
it's so fascinating. We've named a few things there. We've named about needing to be self-motivated. Discipline is another word for that, being disciplined, but also renewed interest in corporate worship, and but also having a season where I guess those things that we could quite happily muddle along with, they've been exposed. And so we've been confronted with a number of things, but also we've, on a slightly broader picture, we've been confronted with our own mortality in different ways. We've had to confront that question. And so these are big questions that we wouldn't necessarily normally, deal with, but we've had to think about those. We've been given the opportunity to serve our local communities in different ways and think about being locally rooted. We've been isolated and removed from other people, and so we've had experienced a fresh appreciation for being in the same space with each other. And as you said, Lisa, while it's been horrific, and it has been, and we wouldn't want to wish it again, but at the same time, God seems to have been using that to really refine something and to bring a fresh thing. And I think we haven't quite seen it yet. I think it's still developing and in motion, but there's something of an opportunity here. And so anyway, just think at the beginning of this 2020, thinking about disciplines and self-motivation and thinking about this stuff, how can we cultivate some good spiritual disciplines? What are you each thinking about when you think about this year? I often think about the start of a year. In a year's time, I want to be closer to the Lord in a year's time. So looking back already, so what do I need to do now to begin to grow closer to Him? Have you guys got any suggestions on what you might be doing, what you might be thinking about in terms of cultivating your spiritual life and growing closer to the Lord?
I think for me, prayer. But when I say prayer, it's less me talking and more listening. I think oftentimes when I go into a place of prayer, it's like I'm just telling God everything. Like, I'm just telling Him, this is what I want, this is what I'm working towards, this is what I'm going through. And I think sometimes it's about just sitting and listening and giving myself that space to listen and hear from God. So I think that's definitely a discipline that I want to try and instill this year. So just being open to what God wants to say and do. Normally I start the year with a vision and big plans. And I think this is the year where I'm going to be like, God, I don't know how you're going to move, but I know you will. And I'm ready to receive what you have for me. It's a bit weird for me because I love to plan. I'm a planner. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, that's definitely something. Praying, but also listening a lot more to what God has to say.
You're just on mute, Lisa. There you go.
Yeah, I just, even after 2 years, I still haven't learned.
Well, all of us, like we're all still doing it.
I was just saying that I love that, Janet, because I feel like I'm in a similar theme of normally, at the beginning of the year, I'm a planner as well. And so I would have like a word for the year. I'd have, all my targets and like things, goals for the year ahead. And this year I just felt surrender, just felt that theme of just let go and just keep trusting God and digging into God as much as possible. And I spent sort of the Christmas Advent season looking at Mary, the life of Mary. And she says this line, "May it be unto me as you have said." And it just really challenged me afresh of just what is it that God is asking of me or asking of us, that I need to trust and lean in and just say, whatever your will is, let that be done and not mine. And so for me, it's really about obedience and kind of spending time in just being obedient to the things that God is calling me to do at every step of the way throughout the year, and leaning into that, leaning into opportunities to serve, to be a blessing, but to also go where it's uncomfortable, to go where maybe it's not so cool or trendy, or maybe where I wouldn't want to Instagram, but actually going to the places actually where God is calling me to, and saying yes in those moments.
I mean, I absolutely agree. And yet obedience is such a challenging thing, right? Because often we don't want to do the things, but and so there's partly of the commitment to that direction. Someone described it as a long obedience in the same direction. How do you how do you cultivate that obedience? I've
started with saying yes to the last thing that God asked me to do, and sometimes I think when we think of obedience, we think of, oh, God's going to ask me to do this amazing thing to kind of like move to another country, or this massive massive thing, but it often is probably a lot smaller and a lot closer to home, either in forgiveness, either in relationships, either in maybe showing kindness to the person who's right next to you, but for me, I'm starting with going back to the last thing that God told me to do that I hadn't done yet, and going back to that and starting from there. And so I'm finding it in a lot smaller steps, and maybe somewhere throughout the year I might find myself in another country, but for now it's kind of saying yes to the stuff that's right in front of me, and a little bit like what my sister Janet was saying, of just that spending time with God, making time, in my world to spend with God, in order to hear the stuff that he's asking me to do.
Love that, Lisa. Yeah, so good. How about you, Eleanor?
Yeah, for me, I think the obedience thing is really important and really hard. I also think like an honesty with the Lord. I've been reflecting on 1 Kings 19, which is Elijah's meeting where he's like really angry. He's like, I've had enough, I'm over and out, and God's like, have a nap and a snack, it's fine. And then then he takes him away and he comes in a still small voice and he says, go. And what I'm really struck by in that passage is that before Elijah's obedient, he's honest and just saying to God, like, actually, I'm really tired. I'm burnt out. I'm done. I need a snack and a nap. And God's like, yeah, sure, I actually have 2. And there's something about that honesty before obedience, or as a part of obedience, I think, perhaps rather than a precursor to it, which I've been really challenged on, even just in the last few days. In terms of kind of spiritual rhythms and disciplines and things that I'm working on, I always think about my attitude to running, which is that attitude to exercise, which is that I don't like most exercise. I don't like running. I don't like walking, any of this. But I found something that I really like, which is cycling. And I think when everyone thinks of exercise, they think you need to go and do a run, go for a run, like that's what everyone does. And when it comes to my engagement with Jesus, I often can be like, I need to do what everyone else does, which is sit in silent prayer for half an hour every day. And my brain's like, lol, good joke. Let's scroll Twitter. And actually what I need to do is find, at least to start with, something that works for me, and something which means that I can connect with the Lord, which is to actually like read something or do a Bible study, like specifically with set questions and all that kind of stuff. And with the stuff that I find difficult, the equivalent of running, I do the equivalent of Couch to 5K, which is where you do 30 seconds and then you take a minute and then you do a minute and then you take 2 minutes and then you do 2 minutes and then you take 3 minutes, like all of that, and we build up to it. And so what I'm encouraging myself to do this year is to do what I find is like a heart thing, which, you know, makes me come alive and I can engage really well with, but also to challenge myself to do just a little bit of the thing that I find really hard and try and flex that muscle and build up to my equivalent of a 5K run.
Fascinating. Yeah, so good. And really, really good. So just thinking about the last couple of years, you know, we've all had space to, you know, our schedules have been disrupted. We've all changed pace and rhythm in some way. You know, I know there'll be a lot of reflecting. There has been a lot of reflecting and reassessing of priorities. And, you know, there may be people listening now or later just thinking about, you know, who are reassessing their priorities and where they feel that they need to be spending their time. And just thought maybe we could spend a little bit of time on how we discern where God might be leading us and moving us into. Each of you have moved into, you know, different things. You've each responded to God in different ways, and you're so much, you know, you're doing the different things that you're doing right now. But tell us a bit about what you've learned on that journey. How did you know that God was leading into doing what you're doing now? And maybe we could learn some things for, you know, for those that are in the middle of that space, trying to figure out what is God calling me to do.
So I work with a lot of entrepreneurial women. So supporting them from both a faith perspective and also a finance perspective, because my background's in accounting. And a couple of years ago, I started my own business. And it was through that experience that I realized some of the frustrations, some of the pain points and challenges that entrepreneurs might face. And it was off the back of that I started to hear from God about being called to support entrepreneurs. And it wasn't something that I thought I would ever do. I remember being at uni and being like, no, I'm never going to be in the entrepreneurial space. I'm just going to get a job, climb the corporate career ladder, you know, make my money and I'll be good. But through that experience, it's like God awakened something in me, and he helped me to kind of see how I could use my skills and my faith to support people in a different space. And so for me, it was really about paying attention to what God was saying and what I was seeing around me. Like, people would come to me with challenges and problems, and I would help them to see how I navigated that when I was in that same similar boat. So I think when it comes to calling, a lot of the times it can be something that you've gone through, that God has helped you to say, okay, do you know what? Through the passions or the frustrations, how can I go out and support other people in this space as well? But I think it takes a lot of like just sitting with God and understanding what is his heart for this particular person or this particular people group or this sector, and then seeing how he can use you in that space as well. So yeah, that's kind of how I uncovered my calling. And it's still something, I'm on the journey, I'm still learning and growing and evolving on that path. But it was definitely off the back of my own personal experiences, the things that I observed, things that I felt were lacking, especially in a Christian context, in terms of supporting entrepreneurs, but then also in a social context and how much pressure entrepreneurs are facing to make millions overnight, which is nearly impossible. But, you know, I think just having those frustrations, the passion, taking it to God, sitting in prayer, asking what's the one thing I can do, and then once I've done that, what's the next thing I can do? That's kind of how my journey has been unfolding. So yeah.
So interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Lisa, how about you?
Yeah. I think very similarly. I think it's about hearing what you hear and what you see. So often we think that everybody else hears and sees that same thing, but they don't. Janet, you heard a cry from entrepreneurs that they needed help. No one else heard, I didn't hear that. No one else heard that, but you did, and so I think sometimes it's paying attention to the stuff that you notice. For me, I was hearing the cry around racial justice, and I know so many people heard that, but I heard that faith voice of church leaders not knowing what to do. And that's how, off the back of that came Sankofa Collective of, racial justice community for churches and Christians to be able to engage in the work of racial justice. And so I think it's about paying attention to the stuff that you notice, the stuff that you see, the stuff that the gaps that you see. So often we think everyone else is seeing that same thing, but they're not. And so leaning into that, asking what's in your hand and what you can do with that. It will feel scary. That part won't change. I'm sure the ladies and my sisters on this call will agree that it will feel scary stepping out and saying, maybe I could do something about this. Maybe I could, play a part in this. But it takes that step of faith in stepping out and doing that. And I think when you were asking the question, Matt, that the word that came to mind for me was Sabbath. That for me, the precursor to it was actually rest, was actually having space and time. And COVID did that for me. It was Sabbath. It was lockdown, was space and time where my diary wasn't full, where I wasn't rushing from one meeting to another, where I had the opportunity to sit, to hear, to dream, to hear something that I might have not heard if I was running at a gazillion miles an hour. And I was learning that actually it was important for me to have time in my diary where I rested, where I had space to recuperate, to spend time with God, to sit and just be. And so just an encouragement to maybe anyone listening, that Sabbath is a really important principle that God has given us so that we can be human well, so that we can live well. And so just to encourage you that maybe start there, maybe start by just having some time in your diary where you have a day or half a day or an hour, whatever it is, that you sit and you rest and you be and you find some time to sit. And maybe out of that you might start to hear stuff that you maybe didn't hear when you were at full speed running. Yeah.
I love that. Alianore, how about for your experience?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Janet and Lisa both said about listening to what you can hear and being really scary, and resting and that kind of thing. I think for me it's a mixture of things. It's the phrase from Chariots of Fire always comes to mind. It's like, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. And what's the thing that when you do it, like, oh, I think this is what I was created to do. And it might be something really niche, like, I don't know, I'll just get random examples, but it could be something mainstream. It may not look like what you think it looks like, but what is the thing that when you do it, you're like, I think that's what I was made to do. And it's not what I expected, but I love it. But I think I would also want to kind of take a step back and look a little bit wider and think about actually how fundamentally, when I worked at LICC, we talked a lot about primary and secondary callings and about how primarily, first and foremost, we're called to be disciples of Christ. We're called to be beloved by him. We're called to be a part of his church, and we're called to care for creation and for one another and all of that. And then that kind of primary calling of knowing God and being loved by him is worked out wherever we find ourselves. So in our secondary calling, work, home, sports team, whatever. And so what I find so helpful about thinking like that is actually there are going to be times, whether intentionally or unintentionally, we are not where we feel like we should be, whether we're in a job that we need to stay in because we can't afford to go anywhere else. Maybe we're in a situation where something has happened and we're stuck Maybe we've got really ill or been in an accident suddenly and we're not where we thought we would be, and we feel called to be, mentoring entrepreneurial women, but actually we've got long COVID and we're stuck at home and we can't do the thing we feel like makes us who we are. And so what I find so encouraging about the idea of primary and secondary calling is that actually, if we're being loved by God and speaking of him and existing with him and one with Christ, then we are fundamentally doing what we're called to be doing. And whether that's laid up in bed ill, or preaching to the masses, or mentoring young people, or whatever that is, we are working out our primary calling in that secondary place. And for me, for times when I have felt like maybe this isn't the right thing that I should be doing, and maybe I don't want to be here, that's been really helpful. I could talk about my journey into IGM and justice, but actually for me, that's the thing I want to dwell on today.
We're coming to land the next 5 minutes or so. I'd love to hear about each of the organizations, but before that, just quickly, any encouragement, practical things or steps that people could do if they want to respond to what God's calling them into, but it feels a bit scary. It feels like they need a bit of courage, but they're not sure where that's going to come from. What steps might you offer, practical things people can do? The whole theme of this conference is be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. And so many times throughout the Bible, God is saying, don't be afraid, do not be discouraged. What have you found that's really helpful for you when it feels a little bit scary, but you go forward anyway?
I would say talking to someone about it and being like, just actually vocalizing it, because you get so in your own head. Maybe that's just me. You get so in your own head and be like, there's all the things that can go wrong. Oh my goodness, do you not realize? And then you sit down with someone like, yeah, but think of all the things that could go right. And I think having a different perspective on that with someone you trust, with different kind of people around you, different perspectives, is really helpful. And I think classic Christian answer, but praying it through, thinking about it, but also just knowing that God never promised that things would be easy, but he promised that he'd be with us and he'd make us brave. And so just saying like, God, I think this is what you're asking me to do. I'm going to give it a shot. Will you make me brave? Is possibly the best thing we can pray.
It's a great prayer. Anyone else to add anything?
I would say if you're feeling afraid to step out into your calling, it's just the indication of our human nature, and I think sometimes we start to feel like, oh, if I'm afraid to do it, either I'm not called or, I'm not the right person. And I think, first of all, just reassure yourself and say, well, this is an emotion that I'm going through, but I can overcome this emotion through Christ and through God. And I think just having that sense of, okay, this is somewhat seen as a challenge that I'm fearful at the moment, but I know that as I progress through it, that fear will start to move. Because sometimes we wait until we're completely fearless to actually attack it. And that's not always what's going to happen. Sometimes you have to attack it, and then through that, the fear will start to, reduce or actually become eliminated. So I'll say, remind yourself that you're only human. God sees your fears as well, and he will give you the power to overcome those fears. And I think the second thing is to affirm yourself through God's words. I do this a lot. So I will name the fear. What am I afraid of? What does the word say about this? And I'll speak it out verbally, and that helps. So yeah.
It's brilliant, Janet. Lisa?
They have covered so much wisdom already. I think the only thing I would add to that is just that God has a track record better than anyone, and he hasn't failed anyone yet. And so if he's going to fail you, you're going to be the first person, which is pretty huge. That makes you more special than special. And so I guess it's just kind of stilling our hearts, and so often when you look throughout the Bible, God often picks the most unlikely people to do the most craziest things. And so if you are feeling inadequate, unable, how, why, when, all of those things, great, what a great place to start, because I have seen God do it over and over and over again and step in and help people who couldn't. And so just be encouraged that maybe if you feel like that, probably a good thing and a good place to start, that God's right round the corner waiting to help you out.
Janet, coming to you, and then just 30 seconds each. I'd love it if you could just say 30 seconds on your organization, and where people can find out more. Janet, tell us about Ascribe.
Yeah, so Ascribe is a female platform for entrepreneurial women. It's a faith-based platform, and the mission behind it is to help women build a brand and business without leaving their faith behind. We run events. We've got a podcast where we interview entrepreneurs across the world, and it's really a community for women to come alongside each other, support one another, and really push people closer to God and their goals. You can find us on Instagram, on Facebook at Ascribe Culture. And yeah, would love to have anyone who's creative, entrepreneurial, considering it, know anyone, just get in touch. We'd love to have you. So yeah, that's me. Thanks,
Janet. Alianore, tell us about IJM.
Great. So IJM, International Justice Mission, we're the largest anti-slavery organisation in the world. We work globally to protect those living in poverty from violence, not just by bringing people to safety, but then working through local courts, local law enforcement to see criminals prosecuted, thus seeing an end to impunity and kind of protecting people from ever being harmed in the first place. So across the world, in the time that we've existed, we've seen over 66,000 people brought to safety from slavery and violence and protected hundreds of thousands. You can find us at ijmuk.org, and I would love to be friends with you. Fill in the information. I work particularly with churches. So if you head on to ijmuk.org/churches, fill in a form, I will get in contact with you and be your friend forever.
Thanks, Alianore. Now, Lisa, tell us about 30 seconds about Sankofa Collective.
Yeah, so Sankofa Collective is a ecumenical Christian organization, and our heart is to see the ministry of reconciliation, our call to ministry of reconciliation, walked out as Christians when it comes to racial justice. And so we feel a call to call the church to truth-telling, repentance, lament, and action, and helping churches and church leaders be a part of that. And we've seen amazing testimonies over the last year as we've journeyed together, learning, praying, worshiping, and believing God for more. And so you can find us at Sankofa Collective UK on Instagram or Facebook, and you can also find us on our website at www.sankofacollective.org, and you can find out more or sign up to our blog or newsletter, or come along to one of our events. We'd love to have you. We really would. Yeah.
It's been such a treat to spend some time with you this evening. Thank you all, Lisa, Janet, Alianore. Thank you for giving up your time this evening to talk about Christian living in 2022. You've given such pearls, such insights, and it's been wonderful to learn from you. I'm taking away a real inspiration from tonight. Thank you for this evening. God bless you, and I hope you have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.